Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. My name is Emmanuel and I am with the Delaware Developmental Disabilities Council. Welcome to our YouTube channel. If you have not already, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Make sure you like, share, and comment on this video. Today I have the pleasure of sitting down with some great friends of mine. I have Terry Hancherry, who is from the Advocacy and Outreach Committee from the Delaware Developmental Disabilities Council. I have T.C. Bunk, who is also a member of the Advocacy and Outreach Committee. And I have Katie from the Delaware chapter of Alzheimer's Association. And I want to thank you all for joining me for this episode. Today we are going to have a conversation and to discuss the correlation between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. And Katie's going to share some more information later on why this topic is so important, especially within this month. But before I get into all of my questions and start the discussion, I want to ask Terry, as the council Advocacy and Outreach Committee decided to do this awareness campaign and make people aware of the correlation, can you tell me how and why you guys chose to take that on as a project?
Sure. Thank you, Emmanuel. So back in 2016, we invited Katie Macklin to what was then the Adult Issues Committee and is now Advocacy and Outreach. She told us at the time that 26,000 Delawareans were living with Alzheimer's, and I'm sure those statistics are so much higher now. Also, at the time, 75% of people with Down syndrome were showing symptoms. We also learned that at the time, other states were not really looking at this issue. After the meeting, we invited more experts to the table and made this an objective in our state plan. In 2017, Katie joined the council and worked closely with us on the connection between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. After much planning, the council then issued an RFP, which is a request for proposals, for an awareness campaign for families, physicians, educators, and others on the correlation between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. The campaign was fully rolled out in 2018, and we have some wonderful videos from physicians, along with other resources on the DDC website. This has been largely unaddressed because I believe that the government has just recently started listening to physicians and families, and in general, the population forgetfulness is a symptom of Alzheimer's, but not so much people with Down syndrome. It manifests itself in other ways, such as behavioral problems and personality changes. And we also know that people with Down syndrome are now living longer than ever before. So we're seeing much more of the aging process earlier on people with disabilities in general, but also a big correlation with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's.
Wow. It sounds like you guys, not only took on a big project, but you really found a concern and you really want to make people aware of the things that are, kind of misrepresented. As you said, people are just now starting to listen. So I appreciate you guys really taking on a major project to make people aware of the correlation, and imagine how many families are not aware of the major concerns out there with the correlation between, Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. And, having one or the other can be a challenge. But imagine, possibly having the two as a concern, and then you have two, things to work with that have multiple concerns that may have different signs, which I believe we're going to get into a little bit more later. But thank you for taking on such a wonderful project. And then Katie, I had to kind of continue that question. can you tell us a little bit like what is research saying in regards to this, and just share, how much you know as far as what researchers are saying and where we can go from there.
Sure, absolutely. And once again, Emmanuel, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, particularly this month because it is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. At the Alzheimer's Association, our mission is that we are leading the way to end Alzheimer's, all dementia, by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. And this is for all those individuals who are impacted by dementia, as well as for their caregivers. We need to ensure that all people who are living with this disease and their caregivers are getting the care and support that they so desperately need. So in terms of research, as Terry said, as they age, individuals affected by Down syndrome have a greatly increased risk for developing a type of dementia that's either similar or very similar to Alzheimer's. Autopsies show that by the age of 40, the brains of almost all individuals with Down syndrome have significant levels of beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles. These are abnormal protein deposits that are considered the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. However, despite the presence of these brain changes, not everyone with Down syndrome develops Alzheimer's. So that is actually one of the questions that researchers are hoping to answer about Down syndrome, is why some people develop the dementia symptoms and others don't. So researchers are working to answer a similar question about those who don't have Down syndrome. Why do some people have those changes that are characteristic of Alzheimer's, those hallmarks of the disease, those plaques and tangles, but never show symptoms of the disease? So this is one key area of research. And I also just wanted to share that in a couple of years ago, the National Institutes of Health launched a $37 million initiative to identify biomarkers in the blood and brain that can help identify and track Alzheimer's in people with Down syndrome. The Alzheimer's Association has been proud to be a part of a group who have convened scientific workshops addressing Alzheimer's and Down syndrome, and are funding efforts to develop a blood test to identify individuals at higher risk for developing Alzheimer's, such as those with Down syndrome. As far as the causes and risk factors go, because I think this is an important component of that research, is why do scientists think that people with Down syndrome are at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's? When they think, like other health conditions, health issues associated with Down syndrome, that this increased risk for dementia results from the extra genes that are present in those who have Down syndrome. So one of the chromosome 21 genes of greatest interest in the Down syndrome Alzheimer's connection codes an amyloid precursor protein. And this protein produces beta amyloid. And as I just said, beta amyloid is one of those hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And having an extra copy of this particular gene increases the production of beta amyloid, which triggers the chain of biological events that leads to Alzheimer's. So the fact that this protein is so strongly implicated in Alzheimer's definitely makes this intersection of Down syndrome and Alzheimer's a really strong focus for research.
Wow. I see why you guys collaborated with Katie to kind of roll this out. Katie seems to have a knowledge base, and you can literally see the passion on your face as you talk about it. Wow, that's amazing. And when we talk about research, let me back up just a little bit. And this can be more of an opinion question. Why do you think this type of thing is really not being publicized, and why don't people really know that there could possibly be, there is a correlation between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's, even though that everyone with Down syndrome doesn't develop it, there's a major correlation there. But why do you think people don't really know that yet? And why is it pretty much being unpublicized?
Can I answer?
Yes, please.
My opinion is that the life expectancy of people with Down syndrome has really increased. When my brother Michael was born in 1960, my parents were told that he would live to be 10, 12, in 1985, I think it was 1985, they were, Down syndrome they said we're able to live to like 25. And now in 2018, it's 60. So that's what I read, that Katie can step in, that sometimes they don't even, I talked to a psychologist once about it, and I said, you don't really know, right? And he said, no, because we've never had people with Down syndrome live this long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I would absolutely agree with what TC just said. I mean, just, we know with Alzheimer's in general, advancing age is the greatest risk factor for this disease. So, it's the same in the population of people living with Down syndrome. Advancing age increases the chance that a person with Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's disease. So I think, it is the fact that people with Down syndrome are living longer now. So we are seeing more of these cases of that connection between Alzheimer's and Down syndrome. I also think part of it too, and this is just the stigma associated with Alzheimer's in general. I think that, and we're working really hard to build awareness of the impact that Alzheimer's has on our communities. But there is still a bit of a stigma associated with that. So it's breaking down that stigma, building that public awareness of Alzheimer's, of the warning signs, and I think that also sort of plays into those living with Down syndrome. Same thing. We need to work to break, and this is what is so great about opportunities like this and opportunities to work with the Developmental Disabilities Council to really spread the word in Delaware, because this is a really important issue that's impacting Delawareans. But the more we talk about it, then the more awareness that we're building, and that's a really good thing.
So I heard you say something very interesting. MCC, thank you for sharing, your brother's story and how you, as a family member, was impacted. And thank you for sharing that. But I heard you say something very interesting, was that, people are living longer. So Katie, as far as people living longer, how much does the risk increase? When we talk about people living longer in age and developing, Alzheimer's, how much risk does the age play in somebody developing Alzheimer's?
Great question, Emmanuel. So in people with Down syndrome, we estimate, and I actually think that this is based on some statistics from the National Down Syndrome Society, that about half of people who are over the age of 60 who are living with Down syndrome will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or will develop Alzheimer's, I should say. Diagnosis is another issue, and ensuring that that diagnosis is made. So it is estimated that about 50% of those over the age of 60 will develop Alzheimer's and those symptoms of Alzheimer's. Generally with Alzheimer's, the estimate is about 1 in 8 over the age of 65 will develop it. So you'll see, just 1 out of 8 compared to 50% of those with Down syndrome, that there definitely is that connection there between the two, and that connection with that advancing age.
Wow. So I gotta go back to TC, and I'm just wanting to know more, about your brother's story, and you can kind of tell us what you want us to know. But I gotta ask, from your, perspective and your experience with your brother, what was some of the signs that you noticed, with your brother, and some of the concerns as a family member? Can you just share a little bit about that and how you guys handled it? And then, what are some of the things you can do as a family member to kind of, support that loved one, or try to, make sure everyone is safe? And there's a lot of questions inside of my questions. So just feel free to share whatever you want us to know.
Okay. Well, Michael was living with my husband and I when he was 48. He lived with us earlier, but at the age of 48, I started to see little changes in him. And it wasn't that he was forgetful. It was the change in behavior, and it was very subtle. He usually, you know, he's a real lovable guy, very outgoing, but I could see that he was, I guess, a little more frustrated at things that he wouldn't normally be frustrated about, and just a little bit of a mood swing. So I went to our family doctor, and he put him on some meds, and it was almost like he reached this plateau, like for like 4 or 5 years, he was just about the same. We would just increase the medicine as he started to get a little more, you know, big changes. Like after 4 years, I took him to the Swank Memory Center. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to create a baseline for Michael so that, and I think it's important to do that. I think people need to know what somebody was capable of doing like 10 years ago versus now. And then you can see the changes, because I said in the beginning, it was just so subtle. Okay, so we took him to the Swank Memory Center, and then it just kept increasing. His health got a little, you know, he was getting pneumonia. He seemed to be a little frailer. He started having outbursts. His sleeping changed. He was a little more irritable at work. And then what I did was I'm good friends with, he worked at Elwyn. So I was very good friends with George Early, who was his case manager, and Vicki Hashek. And they were with me on it. They watched him. You know, they watched his behavior, and we just kept a close eye on him. And the same with Mike, because I have 3 other brothers and my sister Trish. And so when he would go to their house, everybody just kept an eye on him. And the interesting thing with Michael was that he just kept like straight, and then just all of a sudden just went down. And that happened like 2 years before he passed, where, you know, I was sleeping with him. He had terrible outbursts. He was having hallucinations. It was really a living hell for him. And then a year before he passed, he started with seizures. And I think when I talked to the doctor from the Swank Memory Center, he said that's probably like the last stage. Katie, if you correct me if I'm wrong, that's one of the last parts of the Alzheimer's is seizures. But the interesting thing is, he knew everybody. Until the day he passed, he knew all of us. He never lost that part of his memory. And yet, but he did have it. And people would, I was telling the other day, I was talking to Terry saying, people did question me on, are you sure he has it? But it just manifests itself so differently with someone with Down syndrome. And I've met a few, you know, parents along the way where their children have died from the Alzheimer's, and they pretty much said the same thing. That it wasn't lack of memory, or maybe they didn't understand it was a lack of memory, you know, because I remember him like hitting his head saying, I can't think. So maybe that was him, you know, not remembering, but he couldn't express himself. I think that was the most heartbreaking and the hardest, is that he just couldn't tell us. And, you know, honestly, I don't know about medication, Katie, but there really was no medication that could really, you know, we did so many different page full of medications that we tried, and just didn't really help. At the end, it didn't help at all. It was just like a crapshoot. We would just try this, we try this, and I think after a while, there's no controlling it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it really sounds like to me, you know, as a family member or a caregiver, one loved one, however you want to put a title on it, to really pay attention to your loved one. You know, if it shows different things in different
Right.
people, the takeaway would be to pay attention to those behaviors and how people change. You know, like you said, you want to be able to, you know, kind of look at what they did before versus what they're doing now.
Right.
If this thing shows differently, then the best thing a loved one can do is to really know that loved one and pay attention to those signs. Like you said, your brother had, you know, knew who everybody was up till, you
Right.
know, the day he passed away. Which, when we hear Alzheimer's, first thing we think about, well, they're not going to know who I am.
Right.
You know, because because I know as far as my experience with family members who have had Alzheimer's and things like that, one of the first things my family members would say, "Oh, well, do they know it? Do they know everybody?" Well,
Right.
that's not always a telltale sign. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm always telling my family members it's not just about someone not knowing who you are.
Right.
They're becoming they're becoming their behavior changes. They're more upset than normal. The TV and being too loud, and they're reacting to that, not in the way that you're used to them. You
And it's,
know, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say, it's just so important because if you're not aware of it and if people are just ignoring it and just thinking, well, he's just in a bad mood or he is just out of sorts, they say, it's not fair to the person that has the Down syndrome, because even though we couldn't do much to cure Michael of it, what we were able to do, my siblings and I, were to make his life easier. We cut him back working part-time. Like, we knew what little things would set him off, and we always said we're just circling the wagon with him, just make sure that his life is as good as it could possibly be. And that includes my nieces and nephews, my children. Everybody chipped in, especially the last year, and really helped him, made his life a little easier.
Wow, I commend your family for pulling together, and throughout this whole conversation, it sounds like to me, and Katie, feel free to jump in at any time, but it really sounds like having a strong support system is one of the major keys
Oh, it is.
to someone living out their best full life, regardless of what the treatment plan may be, or like you said, there was no magical medication, but it sounds like support systems are the key to this whole process, and really knowing your loved one and being aware of those changes.
Yeah.
Um, before we end this conversation, um, Katie and TC and Terry, if you want to jump in, please feel free. Um, Katie, what would be um, one if you had to talk to someone who um, is trying to figure out next steps? Maybe they got a diagnosis, or maybe they see some different things happening. What would be something you would say to them to try to help make this transition easier, or information wise? What would you say to them?
Sure, Emmanuel. So I think you said it very well when you talked about having that supportive network around you. That's incredibly important. I also just wanted to say, in terms of caregivers, because we know with Alzheimer's that it doesn't only deeply impact those who are living with it, but it
Yes.
also significantly affects caregivers. And when we think about people who are caregivers of loved ones living with Down syndrome, these might be caregivers that have already spent a lifetime in that caregiving role, and they need support, they need guidance and information and respite care. And I also think about adult siblings like TC. Adult siblings as well, they need additional support when they become the primary caregiver for their loved one who's living with Down syndrome, who may develop Alzheimer's. So, caregivers need that support very much so. And I would recommend, we at the Alzheimer's Association have a variety of supports and services that, we can, that can help people through the caregiving journey, help through the journey with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. The best way to access those is through our helpline. And our helpline number is 1-800-272-3900. Again, that's 800-272-3900. And it is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in over 120 different languages. And we have professional care consultants who are on the other end of the line. And then when a person calls that number, they will speak to a live staff member at the Alzheimer's Association who will help connect them with those services and supports that we offer, as well as provide just, further resources and information, because educating yourself, equipping yourself as best you can for this journey will make it that much easier. It's not going to be easy, but it'll help when you know what to prepare for and you feel like you're taking steps to prepare for that, and getting that information and accessing those resources is a big part of that.
Wow, wow.
I suggest something to the Down Syndrome Association. Well, the Wilmington Hospital has the Down Syndrome Clinic, and I would suggest anyone to go there. You don't have to use them as your primary care, but they have, doctors there. They have social workers, so they're a great resource. And then also the Swank Memory Center. Even if it's just the very beginning, like I said, it's so important to get a baseline and to see how this, and it may not end up being Alzheimer's, because, as you age, sometimes people, a lot of times they just get quiet or moody, but they're a very great resource. And it's good to have siblings too. Terry, like you have what, five other children?
Yeah, 5. I forgot how many.
Because I can't talk about like my sister, my brothers, and can I show you a picture?
Yes, please do.
I don't know if you can see.
Wow.
Very nice.
Jerry.
Wait, that's a perfect picture of that support system that we were talking about.
And that was only I want to say 8 months before he passed.
Wow.
So,
Did I see that in the St. Mark's magazine?
I think so.
I think I've seen that picture.
DFRC might have who was involved with that DFRC.
Wonderful.
One of these books, yeah.
So as
system is everything.
I just want to say how much I learned from these 2 ladies today. I thought I knew a lot from what we've done throughout the years, but this has been really great. And I also want to thank the DDC for shining a light on this issue, and hope that, TC's story and her family will help so many other families, and just having the expertise here today from Katie, I hope will really help families along the way.
wow. Terry, you said it well. I can't say nothing else other than the fact that I to realize how much I didn't know and how much I learned over the last 30 minutes or so. It's truly amazing. And all the information that was shared as far as contact information, I will make sure that those contacts are in the description. TC, if you can send me the contacts that you provided, just so I can put that in the subscription. And Katie, just so I don't get the 1-800 number wrong, can you please send me that as well? And I will put that in the description. And also, if there's a website for your agency, please send me that as well. So again, thank you for joining me for this episode. Again, to my YouTube fans out there, if you have not already, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Again, my name is Emmanuel, and I'll catch you next time on the next episode. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel.